Hi, friends. It is Monday again. I am AnnaLee Dragon, director of the Kinderhook Memorial Library, back with another Monday book talk. And this week, we are in mid-May now, and so I'm a little late to the game, but that's okay. I'm planning this week to discuss some books with you to celebrate Asian Pacific American Heritage Month. So this was a holiday. I had to look this up because I didn't know a lot about the history of how this month came to be. So I'm just looking down at notes. I'm not trying to disconnect. So this month pays tribute to generations of Asian and Pacific Islanders who have enriched America's history and are instrumental in the future success of our country. And so it was initially put in place as a week in May in 1978, and then in 1990 it was changed to a full month celebration. So because of that, I am still technically on time. Those of you who know me, I'm a bit of a procrastinator, so I'm glad I made it on time because it's a really important thing, and I feel like we should celebrate. You know, America is known for being a melting pot, and I think that is what makes us stronger, our diversity. And so this is just a celebration of another group of Americans who are either, first generation, second generation. Some of the books, one of the books at least that I'm going to talk about, isn't written by someone of Asian American descent, but it is about Asian American history. And so I thought it was important to discuss that also. But I tried to focus on authors who are Asian American or Pacific Islander American, just because I think that's where the focus should be. So I'm going to do what I've done in the past and put a book cover up, and then I'll talk about it. And then at the end, I'll put all the book covers again. Sometimes I don't do that, but I don't have a lot of the books in front of me physically today. They are all available in the Mid-Hudson Library System to borrow. We own some, and some of the other libraries in the system own some, so you can get them if any of them sound like something that you want to read. And if you have read all of these books or didn't want to read these particular books, get in touch with me because there are a ton of suggestions. This is just a drop in the bucket, a little taste. Whenever we do a celebration of a certain type of writer or certain culture, it's always a massive amount of work to choose from, and I am just picking some things. So my list is not definitive, nor is it exhaustive, but there's some things that I have read or heard about that I'm looking to read, and so I'm just sharing with you some of the vast wealth of wonderful authors in the Asian American, Pacific Islander American group. There are just so many to choose from. So let's get started, and I'll put the first book cover up now. So we're starting out with YA, young adult literature, which, as I've said before, often kind of crosses barriers, I think. So YA is a tricky category because it can definitely be read by adults, but it's also usually the markers are that it's a little shorter or a little written in shorter chapters, a little easier to digest in that way. But the subject matter is often very serious, very heavy. There are fantastic YA books that I feel like a lot of adults miss out on. And that's why I wanted to start with one in that category, hoping to broaden our horizons, maybe our literary horizons. Our YA collection is fabulous. Matt does a really fantastic job. And so this one is called The Patron Saints of Nothing, as you saw there, and the author is Randy Rebay. And it is a YA novel set in the midst of President Rodrigo Duterte's war on drugs in the Philippines. And it's a novel about a Filipino-American teen who returns to the Philippines in search of answers to his cousin's senseless death. It was described in all the reviews as gripping, poignant, deals with themes of national identity, immigration, family loyalty. These are some things you'll see running through a lot of these stories that I've chosen, but I think that's also true for any group that has emigrated to the United States at some point, kind of en masse, like the Irish Americans came here at one point, the German Americans came here at one point. There are, as we discussed a few months ago, Latino Americans come here from other countries. And I think that all of these themes are relevant to anybody whose family has immigrated at any point, because it is a really difficult thing. And you're often seen as not, maybe in this case, not Filipino enough, but also not American enough. And it can be hard to fit in, I think. And so I'm always looking for, I can't identify with that personally, which is what's so great about novels, right? You don't have to have had the personal experience in order to develop some empathy and some understanding for somebody who has been through these situations, either as an immigrant themselves or a first generation. There are often a lot of expectations on first generation children because so much was sacrificed to bring them to a new country. So I just think that, especially from a young adult point of view, and then the homegoing, going back to the Philippines and struggling with who am I, where do I belong, am I being loyal to my family and to my nationality? I think these are really hard issues, and I love that YA authors are tackling them because I think a lot of teens would identify with this. But I'm also hoping a lot of you will really enjoy it. It deals with some heavy subject matter that could help all of us develop a little more empathy. So that's my first book choice, and now on to the next. So I haven't read all of the books on this list, but this next book I have read, and I found it really compelling, really readable, also very tense. Like, it's one of those books that the tension jumps off the page at you. And it's, as you saw, Your House Will Pay by Steph Cha. And there are great reviews of it everywhere, but one of them that I thought really captured it said that Steph Cha has taken a dark moment in Los Angeles's violent history and cracked it wide open, creating a prism of understanding, which, as I just mentioned, I think is one of the strengths of fiction. For those of you who tend to nonfiction, fiction really lets you live inside of other characters' shoes, which I think is so important to develop empathy and understanding for situations that you have not had to deal with in your own life. Most of the time, luckily, sometimes not, but I found this book eye-opening. So it takes place in the 90s in Los Angeles. It is a suspense-filled page-turner, is how it's described. So it's in the wake of a police shooting of a young Black teenager. LA is as tense as it's been since the early 90s, and it focuses on two different families, one of which is Grace Park, who is Korean American, and her Korean immigrant parents who own a store. And then Sean Matthews is the other character, and Sean has had enough of politics and protest, and he had an act of violence that shattered his family years ago, and he just wants to be left alone. But then another crime hits LA, which is the shooting, and both the Park and Matthews families are forced to face down their shared history while navigating the tumult of a city on the brink of more violence. So while this takes place in the 90s, a lot of these topics are current, unfortunately. But I think that it shows some racial tension between two groups that there people aren't as aware of, which was in LA at the time. The Black society and the Korean Americans society there was a lot of tension and resentment and anger between the two groups. And this author does this really great job of kind of personalizing that. So taking something that is a bigger issue and making it more personal by focusing on two individuals and their families, and kind of showing you both sides of the story, which I think is really, it's hard to do, right? Because it's easy to root for one side in a story like this. What's harder is to take a hard look and listen to both sides and see that there are valid issues facing both groups and that there isn't necessarily an easy right or wrong. And I think that the author, Steph Cha, does a fabulous job of illustrating that and of really kind of putting you in this place where you realize how difficult it must be and how there isn't necessarily a right or wrong in a lot of these. It's not black and white. There's a lot of shades of gray. And it was an interesting kind of historical fiction about a piece of history in LA that I was unaware of. And I just think a lot of the issues can be taken back and broadened to current situations, to other situations in history, and just give us a little more empathy and understanding. So excellent book, highly recommend. Not the lightest read in the world, but definitely not like a slog. You can page turn right through it because it is pretty gripping, but also serious. So now we're going to switch gears a little and talk about another book. As you saw there, the next book is called My Year Abroad by Chang, and it is newer. We do own this one. It's checked out currently, or I would be showing you the cover in person right now. It is a little lighter in spirit, I would argue, than the last book or two that we've talked about. So this book is about Tiller, who is an average American college student with a good heart and a lot, but minimal aspirations. So not living up to our potential, possibly, we could say. Pang Lu is a larger-than-life, wildly creative Chinese-American entrepreneur who sees something special in Tiller and takes him under his wing. So that story isn't the newest story ever, but I think it's wonderful because I think every one of us has something special, and it does sometimes take the right person to see it and to help us realize it in ourselves. So I love a story like that. I love an underdog, and I love somebody taking a chance because they just have a gut instinct or they see something that other people don't see. And so this book has been described as a manifesto to happiness. A book that moves. It's a wild ride, a caper, a romance, something of a satire. So a lot different tone than two of the other books that we've discussed so far, which is why I offer it, because maybe you're not in the mood for a heavier read. This might make an excellent beach read. And it's just gotten a lot of praise, very well reviewed, and a little lighter for those of us who are looking for something a little more fun and happiness filled. So I highly recommend you check it out and get on the list, and on to the next. So the next author is probably familiar to many of you, but I don't know if you've read this book. So I know from our library, a bunch of people have read Pachinko, which is by the same author, Lee. And that one has been wildly popular. A few of our book clubs read it. A lot of people request that one. That's actually her second book. So her first book, her debut, is called Free Food for Millionaires. Anybody who watches these talks know I love a debut. I think that they are often the most creative and the most individual of an author's works, and I'm just a sucker for a debut. So this is Lee's debut, and the protagonist is Casey Han, who is flawed but relatable, which I love because that's in every man or every woman, right? This book is about her struggle to make it in New York after graduating from a top college in the Northeast, but also staying true to her identity. I think that that's always a struggle because I think we all have kind of two minds, one where we think what we should be doing and one that is what our heart truly wants. And sometimes they're the same, and that's awesome. But for a lot of us, it's a work in progress to get there. It doesn't come easily. There's a lot of expectations put on us by our parents, by our family, by our friends, by society. And so that struggle to kind of find the balance of being true to yourself while also kind of fitting in and making things work, I think that's really important. So I look forward to reading this one. I have not read it yet, but I hear excellent things. And as I said, it's a debut. So if you loved Pachinko, this might be the next one. You might not even know she had written another book. So this might be your next read. Free Food for Millionaires. Okay, I have one more book to discuss before we're done for the week. So the last book of the week is not, again, I'm sorry, it's not a lighter read, but I think it's very important. And I wanted to talk about this particular book, which is called Facing the Mountain, A True Story of Japanese American Heroes in World War II. And I wanted to hit on this because it's a nonfiction book, so I thought that that was an appropriate add-in for some of you who might not be fiction readers. It is by Daniel James Brown, but it is about these four families. I'm sorry, I'm just checking my notes. So it's the epic story of four Japanese American families and their sons who volunteered for military service and displayed uncommon heroism. It's called masterly, propulsive, gripping, and I think the aspect of this that's really interesting is the author doesn't just focus on the four young men who volunteered, Japanese American men who volunteered to go to war. It also, at the same time, talks about what their parents faced in the United States post Pearl Harbor. You know, they were forced to shutter businesses, surrender homes, submit to life in concentration camps right on United States soil while their sons were fighting for our country. And the sons faced bigotry, but they believed in their bright futures as American citizens. And I think this is, a shameful part of American history, which is all the more reason we need to talk about it and remember it. Also, these young men whose parents faced all of that were over there fighting for us. So it is a really difficult thing to discuss. And I think that the author, from everything I've read, did a masterful job at kind of telling both stories, because imagine that your son has volunteered to go fight in a war for your country overseas, and then in the same time you are being treated as if you are the villain in the story. You are being put in concentration camps and having your homes and things taken away from you because of your Japanese heritage. So I think it's a really important thing, and I know it's not the brightest note to end on, but I think it's a vital story, because as we know, when we forget history, we repeat it, and that's something that we can't afford to let happen. So I think it's a really great book to end on, in that it's powerful and well written and tells a really important and difficult story. So I apologize for ending on kind of a downer, but I do think it's completely necessary, and I think you will probably really enjoy the book if you're able to pick it up and read it, and you'll learn something, which is my other favorite part about reading. Nonfiction's great for that, and I think it's important. I've said this before, but it's really important to remember that great nonfiction reads like fiction. A great book is a great book, and a great storyteller is a great storyteller. So if you are siloed and you only read fiction or you only read nonfiction, I encourage you to think outside of those silos, because a good book is a good book. And if you need some recommendations, I read everything. So I read both. I read graphic novels, I read children's books, YA books, I read fiction, nonfiction, all over the map. So I am happy to make recommendations if you're venturing into unknown territory in that way. I highly encourage it, actually, especially as we're coming on summer reading, and you'll see our plans for summer reading program and our challenge this year. So I hope you will all join us. And if you need a good book, you know where to go. We will be back next week, and I look forward to talking to you all then. And if you have any questions or there's anything I can do for any of you, please don't hesitate to give us a call, and we're here, and we'll talk to you soon, okay? Have a great day, everyone.